Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Today is May 26, 2017. This is the day before the fight. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, I personally believe Errol Spence wins this fight. In fact, I personally believe Errol Spence wins the fight by stoppage. Right? He is going to the Lion's Den. He is fighting Brook in Brook's backyard. But there are a host of reasons I'll jump into as to why I feel Spence wins the fight. Just understand, though, and I want people to think this through, that Golovkin's trainer, Abel Sanchez, believes that this is too soon for Errol Spence and believes that Brook is going to beat him. There is that point of view out there. Let me say, too, that Brook throws an excellent straight right hand. And if you're going to beat Errol Spence, I believe that's the punch you need to hit the southpaw with. Right? But I'm disagreeing with Abel Sanchez. I believe Spence wins for these reasons. First, unlike many out there, I personally believe that Brook took a great beating in his fight against Golovkin, and that's the last time he was in the ring. Right? Let me say, you can practice all you want. The emotions are going to be different in practice than they are when you walk into an arena, see thousands of fans, and realize that the last time you were in that position, you got your eye socket fractured and your corner threw in the towel and you suffered your first professional loss, and all of this happened inside of the first half of the fight. Right? These fighters believe they're alpha. Brook, before the Golovkin fight, thought he could jump 2 weight classes and take on a guy who was in the middle of a long streak of knocking out middleweights. That's who Brook thought he was. Brook found out that he couldn't make it to the 6th round against Golovkin. Right? Whatever flash happened and stuff like that, he couldn't make it to the 6th round against Golovkin. And you're telling me that so soon after that fight, right, his next appearance, he's going to be in the ring with this guy? I don't like it. I know in boxing, people aren't going to say to you, you know what, I'm psychologically traumatized from my last loss. That's not the culture. Right? The culture is for fighters to publicly shake off losses. Right? Well, understand, that's an image. In the real world, where we're gambling real money, we don't go by images. We go by reality. I don't like the fact that Brook is having this fight so soon after his first loss. Right? He didn't give himself a tune-up fight to shake off the cobwebs. Right? Didn't do that. That's the first reason I think Brook loses. Then there's the fact that Brook's in his 30s. He's been yo-yoing in weight. He just fought 2 weight classes up. He famously weighed in the 170s 30 days before that fight. Right? He looked awfully thin to me at the weigh-in. Understand, yo-yoing works when you're in your early 20s. Just ask Ricky Hatton. It doesn't work when you get into your 30s. It just doesn't. It works until it no longer works. So we've had fighters like Ricky Hatton, right, in his 30s, have his career fall apart. He wasn't the same in the ring. He looked sluggish. Right now, here, you have a guy in his 20s. I know Errol Spence is only 3 years younger than Kell Brook. But you have a guy in his 20s who himself yo-yos a little bit in weight, taking on a Kell Brook whose last fight was at middleweight, 2 weight classes up. Now, I saw Roy Jones look awfully sluggish in his first fight post fighting as a heavyweight. Right? When you lose the weight, especially when after the weigh-in, we know these guys have rehydrated. When you convince yourself you're a middleweight, then you lose the weight to come back down to your weight class, then you're in a strenuous fight against an unbeaten young lion. I think that creates all kinds of problems for you. Right? A third reason why I think Kell Brook loses the fight is Brook's center of gravity. Right? As you look at a Kell Brook fight, and Kell Brook is elusive, Kell Brook moves around the ring, but his body's not as elusive as his head is it? Right? His defense is really moving away from you using his feet, but his body's still there. Have you noticed it? He's not bent at the waist, he's upright at the waist. Now, to me, because his center of gravity is such that his torso is upright, and because style-wise, that's exactly what Errol Spence is looking for. I think Kell Brook is going to have a very hard time keeping Errol Spence off of his body. Right? Then, there's another reason why Kell Brook loses, and it has to do with testosterone and image. Right? Kell Brook beat Shawn Porter. But you do have a group out there, and it's sizable, who believes that that fight wasn't properly refereed. That fight, right, like the second Ali Frazier fight, featured excessive holding. Right? There are many people who don't know what would happen if Kell Brook wasn't allowed to hold Shawn Porter as excessively as he did. Right? Now, understand, a fighter like Kell Brook, who left the division, fought Golovkin, the public thought he did well in that fight, didn't need to return to the welterweight division, could have said, you know what, it's too hard to lose the weight. Then 10 years from now could have gone around saying, look, I was unbeaten at welterweight. Clearly legacy matters to this guy. Well, I'm just here to say that I just think for ego reasons, even though clutching Errol Spence is probably the best way for him to win this fight, I get the feeling Kell Brook is going to be hesitant to excessively hold Errol Spence, because Brook wants to portray himself a certain way. And in the sport of boxing, ego matters. So I get the feeling there are going to be times where Kell Brook is going to think to himself, hey, I got hit with a hard punch, I should tie him up right here. But then is going to think to himself, hey, the crowd might boo. Right? It takes mental discipline, as Kell Brook himself knows off the Porter fight, to fight a strategy that might win you the fight but might elicit boos. Right? I'm expecting there to be some hesitation on Kell Brook's part for legacy reasons, coming off of a loss. Right? In grabbing and holding Errol Spence. And I believe it's going to be a bad visual, because Spence is going to look like the bigger man, even though in real life Kell Brook walks around weighing more. Right? So I think Brook is going to be hesitant in excessively holding Spence, and I believe that's going to play to Spence's advantage. Let's also talk about who Errol Spence is. Now, Abel Sanchez, right, compares Spence to Terry Norris, right? Great fighter, Hall of Fame fighter, beat Ray Leonard. I hope the Boxing Hardcore goes through his videos and learns more about him. Now understand, he fought Julian Jackson. By the way, another Hall of Famer. Great fighter. And Abel Sanchez was the trainer for Terrible Terry Norris. Today, Sanchez feels that Terrible Terry Norris took that fight too soon. Right? Norris gets destroyed in that fight. He believes Spence is taking this fight too soon. He compares it, believe it or not, to Terrible Terry Norris, his former fighter, against Julian Jackson. But there's a difference. Right? Terrible Terry was younger than Errol Spence. Errol Spence is viewed as the young guy here. Folks, Errol Spence is 28 years old. He's older than Canelo. Right? This is different than the dynamic of someone like Gervonta Davis. And Davis proved me wrong. But Davis going overseas to fight and being 22 years old. Now, Davis, obviously from Baltimore, is much older than his years, right? He's mentally tough. He showed that against Liam Walsh. Well, understand, Spence is a grown-ass man. He's 28. He's 6 years older than Gervonta Davis. Right? I get the feeling Spence is going to show up. I know he was booed by some fans earlier. Spence is going to show up. I don't think he cares whether he gets booed. Right? He understands it's a big event. There's going to be a hero. There's going to be a villain. Right? The people are booing you because you're fighting their beloved, native son. Right? A lot of guys would show up in that situation and would, just say, hey, I get it. But this is my shot at a title. As much as I would love to be cheered, I can't worry about the boos. I've been fighting my first 28 years to get to this point. Also, it's not personal. Right? They're booing me because I'm the visitor. Right? A lot of fighters will have respect for fans who boo them when they're on the road because the fighter privately hopes that his hometown fans treat him with that respect when he's fighting at home. So I don't get the feeling that Spence is a young pup here. He's older than he looks. More importantly, let's think about who these guys have been in the ring with. Right? I know Brook was in with Golovkin. He lost that fight. Let's be real. That fight's a stoppage in the first half of the fight. I know Brook was in with Sean Porter. I thought he won the fight. But a lot of holding. Right? Who is the third best guy Kell Brook has beaten? Now, let me say this about Errol Spence. Spence is interesting when you look at his record. Now, understand, in sparring, Spence has sparred several times with Adrian Broner. You want to know what Adrian Broner thinks of Errol Spence? Google this. Adrian Broner, in an interview, said that he didn't think Terence Crawford should fight Errol Spence. Right? There's a video here online. It's on the Mayweather channel, where they track down Errol Spence and they ask him if it's true that he had Broner out on his feet in a sparring session. And Errol Spence doesn't say no. He's diplomatic. He says, hey, a lot of things happen in sparring. People get dazed. People get hurt. We all get dazed and hurt. Right? But in that explanation, you don't hear the words, no, I did not badly hurt Adrian Broner. Right? You know who Spence was training with and preparing for this fight? 154-pound champion Jermell Charlo. Think about that. The champion one division up. Now, Spence has beaten two guys. We all have our secret underrated list. Right? Spence has beaten two guys who I had on my underrated list. Right? Leonard Bundu. I know many people here are saying, Leonard Bundu, come on, how old was he? Tough fighter. I got to tell you, I wasn't expecting Leonard Bundu to get stopped like that. Errol Spence stopped him like that. Right? And Chris Algieri. Look, Algieri, in my opinion, on my scorecard at least, beat Amir Khan. Right? Algieri's an interesting guy because Algieri on his front foot is very hard to handle. I thought there'd be a battle over who owns the pocket in his fight against Errol Spence. There was no battle. That fight reaches a point where it's Errol Spence doing target practice. Right? I think Spence's sparring is top-notch. I think Spence's resume has some guys who I personally feel were underrated. I think Spence is ready for this fight. Right? So you add it all up. And I think what you have is a proud champion, right, who's interested in legacy, who feels that he needs to prove to people that he's not the guy who got stopped in his last fight by Gennady Golovkin. And he's taking on a guy who he knows is underrated by the public. He's taking on a guy who he knows is dangerous. Now this is different. I know Kell Brook has talked about the Joe Calzaghe-Jeff Lacy fight. Right? Jeff Lacy was favored in that fight. It's one of Joe's best moments. Right? But you have to ask yourself, who had Jeff Lacy fought before he fought Joe Calzaghe? Let me say this too. I believe they're members of Jeff Lacy's own family who understood going into that fight that Joe Calzaghe had a distinct hand speed advantage. It was, dare I say, pronounced. Right? Kell Brook has no such advantage in this fight. Right? He's not much faster than his opponent like Joe Calzaghe was against Jeff Lacy. Also, his opponent here has been spending his free time sparring with people like Broner and Charlo. I mean, this is a dangerous opponent. So I don't think this is the Joe Calzaghe-Jeff Lacy fight. Right? I think this is a different fight. Jeff Lacy, too, predominantly one-handed. You can imagine which hand it was, since his nickname was Left Hook Lacy. Right? Errol Spence is two-handed. Right? So, to me, other than a lucky punch, right? And Kell Brook does hit harder than it appears. He's smooth with it, but he hits hard. Other than a lucky punch, maybe a lead straight right hand, I don't see Kell Brook as having a chance to win this fight. I'm not expecting it, folks, to go the distance. I'm not expecting the judges to impact the outcome. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. The way I'd play it would be would be Errol Spence to win the fight. Hedged with Kell Brook by KO. Right? Another way to play it, because the over-under is a little high here, is to take the under. Right? This way you're covered if either guy wins by KO. But I don't see Kell Brook winning this fight. And I certainly don't see the fight going the distance. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours. I know many of you are going to say, come on, this is boxing. These fighters are soldiers. Cal Brook has a short memory. That Golovkin fight has left no emotional scars on Cal Brook. Right? Let's face it. In this macho world of boxing, no one goes around talking about emotional scars. Right? Those are things that happen to everyday people, not boxers. I got news for you. We're all everyday people. Right? In my opinion, psychologically, it's going to be hard for Cal Brook to turn the page on that Golovkin fight. Right? In his very next time out against another guy with a very high KO percentage. Especially since in that Golovkin fight, in my opinion, he not only suffered mental, psychological scars, but he actually had a broken eye socket, I'm sure, that kept him out of the ring for some period of time. Right? I like the challenger in this one. I like Errol Spence. I think the bookies have this one right. I think the favorite wins here. That's how I see it. I'll hedge it with Cal Brook by KO. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.